my name's Lindsay, and thanks for watching today. Before we get started, we wanted to fill you in on our church. Here at Grace, we have a mission and a purpose. Our goal is to help people discover truth, decide on Jesus, demonstrate change, and deploy for others. If you're looking for a church, we would love for you to come and be a part of what God is doing here at Grace. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. We would also like to invite you to one of our Sunday morning services. Check out ohiograce.com for a list of campuses and service times in your area. We have a great time gathering for music, hanging out, and learning about who God is and how that affects our lives. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you here next week at Grace.
Well, hey, how you guys doing this week? All right, good. I know we are all super pumped for election week, right? Yeah, no. I'm just ready to get my college football back on Saturdays without having to sit there and watch all the political commercials and all the politicians pointing at the other one saying this one did this and this one said that. I'm so sick of that, okay? And so looking forward to just this week being done, okay? But here at Grace, over the last few weeks, we have been talking about the idea of how does a God follower, right, navigate secular culture and political chaos. And so especially for us, as most of us God followers in this room, for this specific week, as our nation gears up for this election and all the things that are going to happen as our nation, as we experience the consequences and the chaos that comes with it, and as we as Christians, as we take a look at the world around us, and it sure feels like that all of it, it's like in total opposition towards God. The question is, how do we as God followers navigate a nation who's just not interested in the God that we worship? All right, what does that look like in our life? And so we've been taking a look at a young man named Daniel and his three friends who lived 2,500 years ago, and they lived during the time of an evil politician named King Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled over the most powerful nation that the earth had ever seen up until that point, called Babylon. Now, if you remember, God handed Israel over to King Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, who defeated Israel. And when that happens, the king takes the best and the brightest people within Israel and ships them off to Babylon to work for the king. And so Daniel and his three friends, at around the age of 13 or 14 years old, they get kidnapped and taken to Babylon, to a land that they've never been a part of or never lived before. And they have to figure out, how does a God follower navigate this? All right, how do we navigate Babylon? How do we live the right way in a culture that is just so anti-God? And so we've been looking at that for the last few weeks, and we've watched these three boys not bow down to culture, but instead we've watched them actually quite the opposite. They've changed the culture around them. And in the last 3 weeks, we've watched them choose to honor God, and the God each and every time showed up. And so today, it's going to be a little bit different in the fact that today we're going to fast forward about 30 years in Daniel's life. Daniel's going to be about 50-ish years old. And today we're going to be looking at a super unique perspective in the fact that we are going to see what God does next from Nebuchadnezzar's own words, okay? And so you guys ready? All right, we're going to start in Daniel chapter 4, verse 1. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar, it's like a proclamation here. He says, King Nebuchadnezzar, to those of every people, nation, language who live on the whole earth, may your prosperity increase. Sounds super politician, right? Right? It does. Okay. All right. Some of you guys aren't too sure. Whatever. All right. He says, I am pleased to tell you about the miracles and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. Now, you should be sitting here, if you've been here for the last few weeks, you should be sitting here and you're like, whoa. What's going on here? Like, is this Nebuchadnezzar? Like, is this the same Nebuchadnezzar that we've been talking about? All right, is this the same Nebuchadnezzar that took over the world for his own glory and for his own power? Is this guy? All right, is this the same Nebuchadnezzar that kidnapped children? That's not cool. Is this the same Nebuchadnezzar that pulled off arms and legs off of his most trusted advisors and off of his friends? Is this the same Nebuchadnezzar that built the statue that we talked about last week where he commanded everybody to worship his statue, and if you don't, he'll kill you? All right, is this that guy? Is this the same Nebuchadnezzar that threw Daniel's 3 friends into a furnace alive? And so here the question should be, is this the same Nebuchadnezzar that you're telling me that he writes a chapter in the Bible? And the answer is, yeah, same dude. Which means, just throwing this out there, no matter how we feel, no matter what we think, no one is ever too far gone from God, right? Nobody is. I mean, that's why we never, as Christians, give up trying to convince the people around us to surrender to God. I mean, here is this king, King Nebuchadnezzar, that we've been looking at for this is our 4th week, and we've seen all the horrible things that he has done, and it's just interesting. I mean, this guy is the worst of the worst, and here's this guy, and he is saying how great are his, meaning God's miracles, and how mighty are God's wonders. God's kingdom is an eternal kingdom, and God's dominion is from generation to generation. I mean, this guy, this is like a complete 180. And we're like, what is going on here from what we've seen of Nebuchadnezzar so far? And so, sure, over the last few weeks, we've seen Nebuchadnezzar get wowed by God in different ways. We saw in chapter 2 where Nebuchadnezzar has this super weird dream, and nobody could tell him what the dream is because that's kind of his standard. And so he calls Daniel in. If you remember, Daniel not only interprets the dream for him and says, actually, King, this dream that you've had that's super weird, it's actually a message from God, and this is the dream that you had. And King Nebuchadnezzar hadn't told anybody the dream yet, and here's Daniel telling him exactly what had happened in his own dream. And so if you remember that, King Nebuchadnezzar was super wowed. He was like, dang, man, this Jewish God is like for real, all right? Like something is different about this God. And then, if you remember last week in chapter 3, Daniel's 3 friends, they refused to bow down to his like big old statue thing. And so if you remember, what he does, he has them thrown into a furnace as a form of execution. And as he's watching, he looks in and he can see like there's people inside walking around. Like the guys that he just threw in are actually walking around inside the fire and inside the furnace. And so he calls them all out and he's like, man, okay, like your God's legit. All right, like your God is, this is crazy. I've never seen anything like this before, but I've seen it with my own eyes. And if you remember, he lets out a proclamation saying, man, like the Jewish God is the God, okay? So everybody, no one make fun of the Jewish God. And so he sends that out there. I mean, he was wowed by God. But as much as Nebuchadnezzar had been wowed by God, and as much as he goes around and tells everybody about God, like some of us in here, he simply has not yet surrendered to God. And by the way, can I just point this out? When God pursues us, which he does, and we resist him, which a lot of us do, right? Meaning instead of us bowing to him, we actually push back against him. I just want to let you know and kind of warn you, man, God steps up his game, okay? That's what he does. And that's the point that it gets to in King Nebuchadnezzar's life. And so King Nebuchadnezzar says in his own words, he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house, and I was flourishing in my palace. This word flourishing, it means living in luxury. He's like, I had everything you could possibly need. I have done it all. He says, and I had a dream, and that dream freaked me out while I was in bed. And the images and visions in my mind, they alarmed me, okay? And we're like, what is going on with this dream? And so he didn't know either. And so he issued a decree to bring all the wise men of Babylon, he says, to me in order that they might make the dream's interpretation known to me. He wants to know what this weird dream means. And so when all of the advisors came in, he says, I told them the dream, but they could not make its interpretation known to me, meaning they did not know what the dream meant, and they can't figure it out. And so what Nebuchadnezzar does is he goes and he calls in 50-year-old Daniel. And Nebuchadnezzar tells Daniel the dream that he had. It's kind of a weird dream, all right? Kind of goes like this. He's like, hey, Daniel, I had this dream, and you were able to kind of help me out many years ago, but I got this weird dream again. I dreamt of this huge tree. It was like super tall. All right, it was a great looking tree. You could see it for miles, and it was looking good. You ever are driving out in the country or wherever, and you kind of pass a tree, and you're like, wow, that's a nice tree. Isn't that what old people do? All right. That's what I do now. and I'm kind of questioning I'm like, man, I'm too young to die. Like, is that what it is? But I look out and I'm like, man, that's a nice tree. I wish I owned that tree. It'd be like something like this. And not only tree, you also look at the land, you're like, man, I wish I owned those acres around that tree. That'd be nice too, And you think of all the things that you do, that kind of thing, right? That's kind of what that's kind of what Nebuchadnezzar dreams of. He dreams of this like huge tree. Right, and if he was here with us today, he might be like, yeah, that's actually very similar to the tree. That's what it looked like. And he's like, not only was it just a tree out there, but this tree was like full of birds. It had a bunch of animals that were kind of like laying around in its shade. I mean, out of all the trees that you could see, he's like, man, this tree was winning. Okay, like this tree had it all. But then, what really freaked him out, he says, as I was laying in my bed, I also saw in the visions in my head, my mind, he says, I saw a watcher, more like a holy one. Here he is. He's trying to describe what he saw in his dream. He's like, it was just this person, like an angel or something, like coming down from heaven, from the sky. And he called out in a loud voice. He says, I want you to cut that tree down and chop off its branches. And so when King Nebuchadnezzar hears this, I mean, he's like, so you got this huge tall tree. This angel thing is like, hey, we're cutting this thing down. And Nebuchadnezzar's just like, uh-oh. What? Why are we cutting this down? All right, what does that mean? All right, that doesn't sound good. And so then he says, but leave the stump with its roots in the ground and let him, notice by the way that this angel that's like proclaiming this or talking about this angel, he changes from it, the tree, to him, something a little more personal. And he says, let him, who's him? He's like, I want to know who that is. Let him be drenched with the dew from the sky and share the plants of the earth with the animals. He says, and let his mind be changed from that of a human, and let him be given the mind of an animal for 7 periods of time, meaning for 7 years. He says, this word is by decree of the watchers, and the decision is by the command of the holy ones. He says, this is so that. And so here's the angel. He's like proclaiming. He's like, this is the reason why this is going to happen. It's so that the living, meaning Nebuchadnezzar specifically, right, will know that the Most High is ruler over human kingdoms and not Nebuchadnezzar, and he gives them to anyone he wants, and he sets the lowliest of people over them. He says, this is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. And so Daniel's in there. He's in the throne room with the king, and he hears, all right, this dream. And Nebuchadnezzar writes that Daniel specifically was stunned. I mean, Daniel hears this and he's like, oh, okay. All right, he was stunned for a moment, and his thoughts alarmed him. Here we have Daniel, and what we see from Daniel, by the way, is that Daniel genuinely cared for King Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, he cared for the guy. Even though King Nebuchadnezzar took everything from Daniel, and even though King Nebuchadnezzar enslaved Daniel, he wanted what was best for King Nebuchadnezzar, even though the king was his political opponent. Right? That's what he wants. Now, what's that not mean? That doesn't mean that Daniel admired him, okay? And I don't think Daniel looked up to him. I don't think Daniel approved of all that he did, that's for sure, right? Let's be honest, King Nebuchadnezzar was a less than ideal political leader of Daniel's country, okay? Have we ever had that before? You get what I'm saying? Like we know what that feels like. Yet Daniel cares for this guy. And so when Daniel hears this dream, he knows that God has another message for King Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel is so alarmed that he is in shock and he doesn't know what to say, and he's so freaked out about this dream so much that King Nebuchadnezzar he's like, hey man, hey, it's gonna be okay. Just Daniel, just tell me what the dream means. All right, just tell me the truth. That's all I'm looking for. I just want to hear the truth. It's okay, just tell me. And Daniel looks at him in the eyes and he's like, okay. He says, my Lord, you're the King of Kings. You're the Lord of Lords. I mean, you are the man, most powerful man on earth. He says, my Lord, may the dream apply to those who hate you and its interpretation to your enemies. Now, right off the bat, we see that this message from this dream was not good news for King Nebuchadnezzar, right? This ain't good. And what do we see specifically with Daniel? It's not good news for the king, and that bothers Daniel. See, we got to remember that Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, they're actually enemies of each other. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar, he is not Daniel's friend. Let me think about it. Put yourself in Daniel's shoes right here. All right, can you do that, like mentally? Like just think about it. All right, you hear this dream. You're standing before your political enemy, okay? And you happen to know by God's power what this dream means. And you stand there before the king, and this is the same guy who destroyed your nation. It's the same guy who kidnapped you and enslaved you and took everything that you had. It's the same guy, by the way, who mutilated your body and threatened to kill you and then even threw your friends into a furnace, okay? Not cool, okay? This is this guy. And now you hear this dream. How do you feel? Get excited? Maybe a little giddy on the inside. You're like, oh, okay. All right. And maybe you look up at God and you're like, finally. I wasn't quite sure. It's been like 30 years, God. All right, I wasn't sure if maybe you forgot kind of what's going on down here, but clearly you didn't. And now you're going to make them, now you got this bad stuff that's about to happen in Nebuchadnezzar's life. Like, it is about time. And then you're looking at the king and you're like, you want to know what it means? All right, you want to know what it means. I'll tell you what it means. You better enjoy dinner tonight because you're going to be eating grass for a long time, okay, which we'll see in just a second. See, the question is, how do you feel when something bad happens to your political opponents? So some of you guys, you get all giddy about it. It's like, oh yeah, like we root against them. Like, think about it this way. Let's bring it home for this week. If your person wins this week, how will you feel towards the other? Right? How will you feel towards their fans or their supporters? You stand there and you gloat, and you brag, you celebrate in front of everybody. I just want to point out to you, Daniel was not like that. Right? Daniel was not like that. Daniel doesn't laugh it up. Right? This bothers him. Why? Because Daniel genuinely cares for King Nebuchadnezzar, who is his political enemy. See, Daniel lived the way that God calls God followers to live in an anti-God culture. And too many of us, because we too live in an anti-God culture, too many of us, we do one of two things, okay? Some of us, what we do is we actually fully embrace the culture, okay? Like, you're all into the culture. You're all about the culture. You're like all in. And by the way, how do you know if you've done that? Okay, here's the question you need to ask yourself. Do the people around you realize that you're a Christian and that you're different? Okay, because I'm just saying, I'm not talking about your family or your spouse or your kids or whatever, the people you see at church. That's cheating. That don't count, okay? What I'm talking about is the people that you work with, the banker at the bank that you see once a week. I'm talking the people who are on your team. I'm talking the people that you're with, the people that you're in class with. All right, here's the deal. If nobody around you realizes or recognizes that you are a Christian and that you are different, and if they cannot tell, then you have fully embraced the culture. All right, you're like all in. You look like everybody else. You talk like everybody else. You complain like everybody else. You don't work hard like everybody else. You're probably in debt like everybody else. You have fully embraced this anti-God culture. I just want to point out, Daniel didn't do that. Daniel chose to be different. And because of that, right, in a time of need, the God follower Daniel is the one that Nebuchadnezzar goes to for help. See, Daniel was different, all right? Not like weird different, okay? Like Mike, okay? This is more like, some Christians are weird. We all know weird Christians, okay? I'm not talking about that, all right? I'm talking about we're different morally. We live our lives differently, okay? We care about people differently. I mean, that's what it looks like. Daniel was that way, and he did not fully embrace the culture like many of us do. By the way, can I also just point out, Daniel didn't do the other thing that we do. We don't fully embrace culture. What a lot of us Christians do is we fully separate from culture. He didn't do that either. See, many of us, we view the world as like an evil that we cannot let in our life. And so what we end up doing is we keep to ourselves as much as we can. We keep our kids away from those kids because we don't want them mixing with those kids. And so we kind of shun ourselves and we disengage politically and we only worry about ourselves and our little kingdom. All right, that's all we're worried about. And we do that so that we don't get contaminated with those people and the sin that they have. And we don't want the dirt. It's like, get it off of us. Get what I'm saying? And can I just point out, that's just as wrong as fully embracing culture. We're not supposed to live like that. Did you know that during the same time, God tells the people, the Jewish people, that were unwillingly deported to Babylon, through the prophet Jeremiah, who was actually a contemporary. He lived at the same time that Daniel lived. They were just in two opposite places. They probably never met, but they actually had each other's writings, which is interesting. Do you know that God tells the Jewish people through Jeremiah, back in Jeremiah 29, it says, "This is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, says to all the exiles, everybody who I deported from Jerusalem to Babylon." Who deported them? Right? King Nebuchadnezzar? No. God, through King Nebuchadnezzar. Here's God saying, I'm the one who did it. All right, you're mad at him. You're mad at your political leader. I allowed this to happen. But this is what I want you to do. I want you to build houses and live in them. I want you to plant gardens and eat their produce. All right, some of you guys will appreciate that. He also says, I want you to pursue the well-being of the city that I deported you to. Who deported him? He's saying, I did it. God's like, it wasn't King Nebuchadnezzar. That's who you're blaming. I get it. It was me. I allowed him to do it because I'm in control. I'm in charge. He says, so pursue the well-being of the city that I deported you to. I want you to pray to the Lord on its behalf, for when it thrives, you thrive. See, like Daniel, we live in a hostile culture. But what we're not supposed to do is we're not supposed to stay huddled up in our small group singing worship songs, hoping that Jesus comes back and takes us away from this trailer park of a planet. All right, that's not how we're supposed to live our life. We're to be involved. We're to be engaged with our anti-God culture. We are to be rooting for our communities and for our political leaders. We're supposed to be praying for our nation and praying for the people around us, because when our community thrives and when our nation thrives, we thrive. See, most Christians, they seem to think that there's only two options. I don't know why we do this. We think either fully embrace culture or fully separate from culture. But there is a third option. That's the good news. Right? And this option is what we see Daniel doing through his entire life, meaning we are to be out in the culture and we are to be changing the culture around us for the better. See, here's the deal. Whether you like it or not, if you are a Christian, if at some point in your life you have given your life over to Jesus, you are sent. It's just true. You are to be engaged with the culture. Now, what's that look like? Looks like a lot of things. But the easiest thing that we could possibly do, specifically this week, ironically, is you should be voting this week, if you haven't yet. Like, that should be part of it. Now, I don't know about you. I think I hate politics more than anybody in this room, okay? I hate politics more than anybody. Maybe you're all into it. That's cool for you. I don't know how you live with yourself. Seems like you'd just be sad all day, okay? Like forever. For me, I'm not a Republican, okay? I don't want to be. I'm also definitely not a Democrat. See, both candidates that we have, unfortunately for us, we got two candidates that can win, only one or the other, but both of them have major moral failures and major checkered pasts. All right, if you love one of them so much that you can't see past that, I mean, that's your problem. But as Christians, we should be voting on policies and platform, not personality of one we like the best or one the other. See, it's policies and platform is what matters, and that's what affects daily lives. And policies and platforms is what allows nations to thrive or fall. And so for me this week, man, I'll be voting, not because it's my civic duty or it's my responsibility or privilege or whatever all the commercials tell you. All right, I'm going to be voting this week specifically because God calls me to be involved and to want what's best for my nation. And so for me, unfortunately, I will be voting for the only candidate that will protect unborn babies, that won't promote the transgender mess that's destroying the lives of too many kids around us, all right, and that will get us hopefully out of these endless wars that we're involved in all over the world. And I get that there's people in here that totally disagree with that. I totally understand. I think you're wrong, but you have a place here, okay? A lot of you guys, some of you guys, you're one of us. But here's the deal. This is what I'm getting at. We as Christians are to be good stewards of the nation that God has given us. That's what we're supposed to do. And it also happens to be the nation with the most freedom and the most opportunity to reach the most lost people on earth. And yet what I see and what I've seen is we are slowly losing it because Christians refuse to steward what God has given them. Instead, for a lot of us, either we fully embrace culture and we just buy into everything that the world tells us. Or we fully separate from culture and we look out only for our family and our lives and ourselves. This is a mess. See, the problem is that that's just not how a true God follower is to live. All right, we are to be out in the culture, changing the culture for the better, pursuing the well-being of our city and of our nation, praying for it. Did you notice that? All right, pray to the Lord on our nation and our city's behalf. All right, we should be doing that constantly. I'm just saying, those of you who hate Donald Trump, okay, I'm just saying, you better be praying for him every day. And those of you who cannot stand Kamala Harris, I sure hope you're praying for her every day. I sure hope you care enough to be praying for our leaders. And what's crazy about this is Daniel seems to get it. Daniel, he got it when he was in middle school. He seems to understand this. We've watched him push back against this anti-God culture where this culture is coming up around against him, and they're saying, hey, you need to conform, you need to be like us, you need to act like us. And what's he do, right? You remember? He politely says no, and then he takes the hits and he takes the backlash without complaining and whining about how unfair it is. See, Daniel, he's standing before the king. The same man who took everything away from him. The same man who now, many years later, is asking for Daniel's help. And Daniel looks at him in the eyes and he says, okay. I will help you because I want what's best for you, king. And I want what's best for this empire. And so Daniel says, the tree that you saw, which grew large and strong, whose top reached to the sky and was visible to the whole earth. All right, that tree, and King Nebuchadnezzar's like, yeah, that's the one that sounds just like it, okay, you know. And he says, and whose leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all, and under it the wild animals lived, and its branches, the birds of the sky lived, and it's got all the, it's like living. And he says, he turns to the king, he says, that tree, he's like, yeah, that's tree, that's the one. What's up with that tree? And Daniel says, that tree is you. That's you. Nebuchadnezzar's like, well, that tree was pretty awesome. All right, it was a sweet tree. And but hold up, what about that cutting down part? What's that mean? All right, I'm going to cut down, leave a stump. I don't like that. That doesn't sound very good. What's up with that? And Daniel says, well, that means that you will be driven away from the people to live with the wild animals, and you will feed on grass like cattle and be drenched with the dew from the sky for 7 periods of time, meaning for 7 years, until you acknowledge that the Most High is ruler over the human kingdoms, and he gives them to anybody that he wants. Meaning, until you realize, King Nebuchadnezzar, that you're not the one in charge, actually it's God that's in charge. And as for the command to leave the tree stump and its roots, it's actually good news for you. He says, your kingdom will be restored to you as soon as you acknowledge that heaven rules. I mean, here he is. Basically, Daniel standing before the king, he's like, okay, here's the deal. All right. Here's the honest truth. You, king, are about to lose your mind. Literally. Right? You are about to go insane. You're going to humiliate yourself in ways that you never thought was possible. All right? That's what's going to happen. You are going to lose everything until you finally realize that God's the one that's in control and it ain't you. And then Daniel steps into his role as advisor and God follower. And he gives the best advice. He says, therefore, may my advice seem good to you, king. And here's Daniel. I don't know if he's on his knees, but I think he is begging the king because he genuinely cares about the king and his nation that he is living in. And he says, please, 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 separate yourself from your sins. Stop living the way that you're living. Separate yourself from your sins by doing what is right and from your injustices by showing mercy to the needy. And perhaps, he's like, I don't know if God will do this. Maybe. All right, but it's worth a shot, right? But maybe, or perhaps there will be an extension of your prosperity. He's like, maybe if you just give up control of your life, like if you just, for a second, man, if you just recognize that God was the one working behind the scenes, and if you recognize that God was the one who gave you your power and gave you your authority and gave you your success, maybe, just maybe, God might change his mind and maybe you could avoid all of this. Just king, what you need to do is you just need to give your life to God. And when King Nebuchadnezzar hears this, he looks at Daniel and he's just like, I don't really like that. Daniel, you think I'm gonna go crazy? Like you think I'm gonna go insane? Ain't no way. I don't think so. And he doesn't take Daniel seriously, but he says all this happened to the king. Actually, at the end of 12 months, okay, so by the way, point out, we already know from the last few weeks all that God had shown King Nebuchadnezzar, right? And King Nebuchadnezzar kind of flirts with God a little bit, but basically he refuses to surrender his life to God. And then here's God giving the king this specific message saying, hey, I'm going to make you go crazy. All right, ain't going to be fun. I'm stepping up my game in your life. Are you ready for it? And King Nebuchadnezzar's like, I don't really believe that. And then God gives him a whole other year. Man, our God is a patient God. He gives him a whole other year. And at the end of that year, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon, and he's overlooking the city that he had built. We talked about this the first week, how the ancient historian Herodotus, he described Babylon as 196 square miles. That's a big city. That's 2.5 Clevelands, okay? That's large. And the wall that was around that city was 311 feet high and 87 feet thick. In fact, what they would do is they'd have chariot races around the wall of the city of Babylon. And the wall around the palace might be the same wall that the king is walking on this very night, right? It was 420 feet high, okay? So that's super high. And as he's looking out over all that he's created, he sees the Euphrates River that they diverted to flow into the city. They got kind of a river walk thing around that. He might be looking at the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which would be over there. That was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world that he had built. And he's overlooking the city that was known around the world for being beautiful and unbelievable architecturally. And he's probably thinking to himself, he's like, man, I have it all. I've truly achieved greatness. I got power, I got prestige, I got glory, I got unlimited wealth. He was literally the world's bank. And he's thinking to himself, I got no army that could possibly challenge me. And he's looking out over everything that he has built, by the way, just like we look at our own company and our own departments and our own portfolio and our own life that we have built, and we think to ourselves the exact same thing. Look at what I've built. See, it's almost like we forget that one small flick of God's finger, and your fragile life and company and portfolio is gone. You forget that. Don't believe me? All right, it takes 3 words. You have cancer. And your life crumbles down all around you. Everything that you built can crumble. Doesn't even have to be health related. All right? You might get that phone call in the middle of the night and you hear the words death or the words divorce. Those words enter your life and your life changes forever. We saw 4.5 years ago, we all watched helplessly as an invisible virus that no one had ever heard of before shut down the entire world. See, unfortunately for us, it seems like it's only when bad things enter our life that we recognize that God is in control and not us. Nebuchadnezzar, at this point, hasn't learned that yet. And his life is pretty great, like many of ours. And as he's standing there overlooking his city, he says out loud, "Is this not Babylon the Great that I have built to be a royal residence by my vast power and for my majestic glory?" Look at all these words. He's like, isn't this I, my? It's all about him. All right, it's everything that he's done. And everything he's looking at is the product of all his work and his effort and his sleepless nights and all his ideas. And as these words are literally leaving his mouth, it says, at that moment, the message against Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. And he literally lost his mind. He literally went insane, and he was driven away from the people, and he ate grass like cattle. All right, he's out there like hanging out with cows. Big difference, right? I mean, you're like driving down the road and you overlook, you see the cow. I think that's the president right there, you know? Like that's what people would have done. It's like, there he is. And his body was drenched with dew, right, from the sky until his hair grew like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird's claws. I mean, this guy, Nebuchadnezzar, he goes crazy and he lives like an animal. And his hair grows out and his fingernails grow. I mean, this is like a middle school boy at summer camp, okay? There's no personal hygiene going on at all, okay? And you can smell it. You can sense it. Last week, I took my oldest son, actually, we all went to Cedar Point, but me and my oldest son, Toby, we went to go ride some bigger rides, and I convinced him to go on the Magnum, okay? So kind of his first big ride, if that makes sense, and by convincing him, I mean I forced him, okay? Because that's what dads do. And so we're actually in line, and he's like, "What are we in line for?" And I'm like, "That." And he was like, "No," but I got him on there anyway. And so we get on the ride, and it's nighttime. I'm not really paying attention to the people around us. And we get up going up the hill, and Toby's kind of freaking out a little bit. So I'm like kind of focused on him. I'm like, dude, it's going to be over in like 1.5 minutes. Like it just doesn't take that long and whatever. And as we kind of come over the crest of the hill, we start going down. The girl in front of me, her hair like flops out, and then it flies in my face. And so for the entire ride, as we're going up and down and all the places, I'm like fighting this hair in front of me. It's like a giant bush of hair. And I'm like, fighting it. It's in my mouth. I mean, it's in my eyes. It's like, I'm like fighting it the whole time. And the only thing that I'm kind of grossed out because I'm like, this girl's hair is in my mouth. And I'm like pulling, not just like strands, I'm pulling like chunks of it. And as I'm doing that and fighting with that, the only thing that's kind of getting me through is I'm like, at least it's a girl that she probably cares a lot more about her hair than I do. And it's probably a lot cleaner than even my hair. And so that's kind of what's like getting me through. I'm like, so could be way worse. I'm not a fan of this, but it could be way worse. And as we came to a stop, and I could kind of see things and kind of get my bearings after all the hair goes down. I'm like, what just happened? I realized as I'm pulling hairs out of my mouth, I realized that it wasn't a girl. It was a unclean, it was a man, and I don't think that hair had been washed for a while. And so as I'm pulling out these greasy black hairs out of my mouth, and it's like all over me, and then I could kind of smell the BO, and I'm just like, oh no, I actually started gagging off the side. I was like, Toby's like telling me about stuff. I'm like, hold up, I'm like pulling this stuff out. And so when I was reading this week, that's the image that I have in my mind. If you're sitting there like, well, that's not just that big of a deal. It's just hair. I'm just saying you didn't see the guy that I saw, okay? Throwing that out there. And so for me, that's how Nebuchadnezzar was, all right? That's how he looked. That's how he lived for 7 whole years. He didn't shower. He was dirty. He lived like an animal. And remember, guys, Nebuchadnezzar is the one who's writing this. And I think later, after all this happens, and he's thinking back as he's an old man, he's kind of at the end of his life, and he's writing this stuff down. He then remembers, and he writes, but at the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, King of Kings, I looked up to heaven. Right? It's this idea that God reached down to this man who was crazy, and he reached down and he put his fingers under his chin and he raised his chin up and he had him look up to heaven. It's almost like God saying, now do you believe me? Now do you see me? Now do you recognize me and my power? He says he looked up to heaven. He says, my sanity returned to me at that moment, and I praised the Most High, and I honored and I glorified him who lives forever. At this moment, Nebuchadnezzar, he finally gets it that God is not impressed with Babylon, and God is not impressed with all of his achievements. Just like God is not wowed by us or our talents or our abilities or our life. God does not need you. He does not need me. He does what he wants. Although God allows us to experience the consequences of our dumb decisions and sin in our life, no matter what we do and no matter what happens, he can and he will use it for good. Why? Because he's the one that's in control and no one can mess up his plan. Not you, not Hollywood, not the left, not the right, not Joe Biden, not Donald Trump, not Kamala Harris. He has armies of angels under his command, and he is in control of everything down to the tiniest atom. He owns it. It's his. And so for us, no matter what happens this week, he can and he will use it for good. I mean, think about it. And it doesn't always have to be enjoyable. Now, you think Nebuchadnezzar enjoyed his 7 years of insanity? I don't think so. But God used it, I believe, to save the man, to show him God's power, to finally change his perspective on life. And when Nebuchadnezzar had finally given up and surrendered to God, he writes, my splendor returned to me for the glory of my kingdom, and my advisors, guys like Daniel, and my nobles sought me out. He says, I was reestablished over my kingdom, and even more greatness came to me. And this time he's like, it wasn't me. I wasn't the one doing all this. This is actually from God. He says, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, I praise and I exalt and I glorify the King of heavens because his works are true and his ways are just. And he is able to humble those like me, who walk in pride. And that's the last time we see King Nebuchadnezzar. He fades off the pages of our Bible in the best way possible. He finally surrenders. There's a good chance that most of us in this room that we get to spend eternity with this man. And so for us, as Christians, how are we supposed to live? Well, Daniel shows us. We don't fully embrace culture, but we also don't fully separate from culture. We are to be engaged in culture, knowing that when our city thrives and when our nation thrives, we thrive. And as we experience the political chaos that will happen this week, no matter which side wins, as we experience the consequences and the fallout and just the mess that's coming, we remember that God is ultimately in control. And in the end, what do we got to worry about? He wins. He's got this. We can't screw up his plan. No matter what happens, he'll use in his plan. Let's pray. Lord, as a church family, especially today, God, we pray for our nation and our community. Something we should be doing all the time. It's what you tell us to do. It's how a God follower is supposed to live. But God, specifically today, we pray for this election that's coming. We ask that your will would be done. God, and that you would be using whatever happens for good, for the good of us and for the good of our country and for the good of our nation, even if we can't see it. God, no matter who wins, we ask that you would change their hearts, just like you changed the heart of Nebuchadnezzar, that you would change their hearts to find you, that you would reveal yourself to them, and that they would turn from their ways and follow you and lead the nation accordingly. God, we thank you for everything that you've done. We thank you for loving us. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you here next week at Grace.